You can go there, Jules.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Golf Shop Insider. I'm Jules Appleby, the marketing manager of Xbox, and I'm joined today by Phil Barnard, who is the VP of Golf Data Tech at Circana, which is a market research company based in the US, and also Mark Hopkins, who is the business development director of Xbox. Hi,
Hello.
guys.
Hello.
Hello, how we doing?
So every edition at Golf Shop Insider, if you haven't listened before, we take a close look at the latest market sales data for the UK. We add some context, have a bit of chat, and we try and help you understand what the market data means for your business. We might even check in a bit of retail advice if you're really lucky. So tune in. It's a good one today. We've got some up-to-date stats from Phil and Mark and some chat about what we're hearing out there in the industry first. Mark, you've been out and about talking to lots of people up and down the UK. And what are you hearing about the current state of pro shops?
Yeah, it's interesting. This time of year, what are we now? Sort of September, heading towards October. And normally at this time of year, in the past few years, certainly generally fairly positive, despite maybe some weather issues, but generally fairly positive. This year, definitely different. So different vibe out there, different feedback from, similar feedback from a lot of different sized shops, which is interesting. So again, normally those larger shops, when you speak to them, they tend to be fairly consistent in what they say, fairly positive, whereas the smaller guys, it depends maybe on some local factors. Whereas I think this year, it just get the feeling that the feedback I've had is that generally people are getting the same consistent message. So it's generally been a tough year. So certainly in terms of number of sales, footfall is down, and certainly stock is high. So stock levels are high out there. Still got a lot of left over. Certainly, as usual, the one usual thing that we had from last year is hardware is doing okay. So that's been a consistent positive sign from a year to date. But when it comes to things like shoes, bags, clothing, both men's and ladies, it's certainly struggling out there. So, and that is not necessarily just related to when the weather is bad. So obviously we've had a bit of a sting at the tail at the end of this year. It's been pretty rubbish weather, although it picked up a little bit sort of this month. And so they've had a bit of a perk at the end of the season, but in those key months early on in the year, the weather obviously did affect it, but also we've had football championships, we've had the Olympics, and I think the feeling is that's affected the whole year through, and so they've been left with stock, more stock than they can cope with effectively. So the sales haven't been there to match the stock. So they were very optimistic at the start of the year. I think end of last year things were going okay. I think everyone was feeling fairly optimistic. And the reality is they've gone, right, we think we can beat the sales this year. And that hasn't been mapped out as they were hoping. And certainly that is, as I said, unusually it is across not just the small shops, but also the medium to larger shops as well. And everyone appears to be in the same similar sort of bracket at the moment. And so as a consequence, what's happening is, orders for next year. A lot of people have, interestingly, they say, "Oh yeah, I've cut back everything," and I say, "Right, let's go through each order," and then they go, "Oh yeah, but I've ordered, more this year of a couple of, the key brands. They tend to still order big on those, but certainly what they've then done maybe is cut out a brand, so they've got rid of a brand,
and that's a good thing, right?
Well, it depends, and this is the thing. So, how much thought actually goes into the decision to get rid of a brand, and I have no qualms with getting rid of a brand if the numbers stack up, and that's what we're really trying to push here. And what we're trying to say is, great, you can see a brand's not performing visually in the shop, and that's and maybe they make too many decisions based on that gut feel. So they see that stock is still left. But what do they? You just need to back it up with the numbers. So you need to see that the numbers back up your gut feel. So, for example, again, I won't give names away here, but there was when you're talking even hardware, which, as I said, generally has actually been okay from the shops I've seen. They they still want to slim down. So they see the rest of the business struggling, and they're worried about next year. So they're thinking, okay, maybe I cut the brand out, and they just go for the one that's maybe the smallest volume of sales. So the outsider brands, if you like. And that's the decision made. Whereas when you sit down and you look at the numbers, I've done it numerous times, and the reality is, yes, they may not be turning over as much, but actually reality is, in terms of margin and in terms of stock left over, and in terms of, sell-through rate, etc., so your stock turns, any of those measures, the reality is that isn't always the case. It could be the case, but it isn't always the case. So it is so dangerous just to make decisions based on gut feel that you've had a bad year, especially when it's a tough year, because you tend to make very dramatic decisions because you're worried about next year, and without thinking it through, without looking at some key stats. So, very high level, just the sales analysis, the brand stats, either of those reports, just running it through and just seeing turnover, look at your turnover, look at the number of units you've sold, and look at the margin you're making, and have a look at what stock's still left in the business. Those are your key stats.
Good advice.
So I think generally feeling, fairly negative. And as I said, as a consequence, I think the knock-on effect is we've just been through the buying process for a lot of people, and they're making big decisions of not to buy so much next year. So I think it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on next year. But if we, I'm sure, Phil, you've got some opinions on this in terms of that decision we made last year. So this time last year, very different proposition. I think we were certainly feeling more optimistic, and people were looking to buy, if not similar, maybe even increasing the quantities they have in their shop with optimism for this year, 2024. And clearly, it's not turned out. So a lot of them are saying, well, I can't predict that. There is no way of predicting this kind of stuff, which, obviously there's no way of knowing exactly what the weather's going to be. There's no way of knowing exactly what the footfall is going to be. Everyone has local influences, but there are decisions that certainly you can make based on factors that we do know are going to happen. Phil.
It's really interesting. I've, with a slightly different hat on, it's quite interesting listening to some of the words you say and some of the things that people are saying. And I wonder what people are using to make decisions, and whether people are actually abdicating on those decisions or taking responsibility for those decisions themselves. Are they just listening to sound bites, or where are they getting what are they basing their decisions on? Because we had a very wet season last year, and we had the middle of the year was it started off pretty well, and then we had a really good start to the season in terms of a dry April, May, June, and then it was bad, and from July onwards it was spectacularly bad. So we lost momentum at the end, but we still had a pretty good May, June, July. I mean, I'll have to look at the stats for May. Last year April was 4% up, May was 3.5% up, June was 2% up. So, the three biggest months of the year were really positively up in the market, and the year ended actually, total year to date was 5% up year to date last year. So
which is why people were optimistic and spending bigger last year.
So, but that, just because something has done well in the past is not an indicator that it's going to be doing well in the future. So what I worry about is people who don't know what they're talking about are going to start may well have lead to those conclusions. I mean, I do see increasingly lots of experts telling everyone lots of things that are going on, and I'm not sure how credible they are. I sit here just looking at data from hundreds, if not globally within Circana, we've got thousands of stores that report in for golf. and we track and monitor those trends. And so I can tell you what the data shows us, and I can look at the statistics and the trends. And I'm interested to know who was setting themselves up for a much bigger year next year when the weather to the second half of the year had been bad, and quite often we get, just because it started bad, just because the calendar's changed, doesn't mean it's going to be really great from the start off with. And I think we saw that all the way through until April. It was shockingly wet. I mean, we had significant increase in number of rain days. We had more rain. It was cold. It was miserable. So we had a really bad start to the year, which sets us off badly. So fairly early on, you could get a taste of what was going on. And then we also had the football championships. You had the Olympic Games. I mean, if all the cards were stacked up against us for a relatively bad year, and the fact is, we also don't tend to get many year on year growth trends. It ebbs and flows. So and not wanting to be too smart about it, but at the end of last year, we were saying that we thought that the market would be down. If it was a good year with everything that was stacked against us, we felt that I felt the market might be down. If it was only 1 to 2% down, that'd be a good result. But it could well be 3 to 4% down with everything that's gone on. And as it stands at the moment, at the end of August, we're 1.8% down. Now, if people had expectations of being much more up from that, I don't know where they've got that advice from or who's told them that. Now, if you'd listened to some brands who will obviously be optimistic about stuff, it's very possible that, and we know actually it is the case, that a brand can be 10% up in the year and another brand can be 10% up in the year. But we've got so much data to show that the way the market moves, if someone's up, it means someone else is going to be down. And so if people are not thinking about that, then they need to start taking a bit more, notice of the data and a bit more, ownership of their own
decisions,
information and plans,
destiny,
and ordering. And I just get this. I get a little bit of a feeling of there's this bit of this abdication that okay, these guys are doing these things for me, and I'll let them get on with it. Instead of it's your business, you've got to take control. You've got to use data to manage it yourself. You've got to make your own decisions. The market is going to do X, and you can't control that. The only thing you can change is stuff that you're doing in it. Now, if people are grasped it by the scruff of the neck and they've changed their shop and they've put a big marketing plan in place and they've maybe expanded and they've put in activities to drive sales, then they could expect maybe some change to their sales that are outside of the market trends. But the market moves as the market moves, and everything was lining up last year that this year wasn't going to be a good year. General election, football championships, Olympic Games, and a weather pattern that was just sucky. Now, actually, interestingly, if you look at the weather patterns now, actually, pretty June, July, August, May, actually, the weather was okayish. Actually, we've had a pretty decent return, and I think if you look at the data for August this year, we're actually the month was up. August this year was up 2.5%. So we're still down 1.8% year to date. But August was actually a really solid month. So the better weather will return some better weather, although it wasn't perfect. It was, I think, much better last year. If you looked at August last year, we lost how many days? August last year, we lost. Sorry, I'm being a bit slow here. Apologies. August last year, we lost 14 and a half days to rain. This year, we lost 13. Okay, so that wasn't a big difference.
One more day.
But the lead up to that, the fact is last year, July was spectacularly bad. And I think people just get out of the habit. This year, July was much better, relatively rain-wise. July last year, we lost 18 days of rain. July this year, we lost 12 days of rain. So, that habit that's formed when we're going into the holidays and stuff, it would have been better. And I think that's had some impacts. Now, what I can see from the stats is that the people were out there playing golf. I mean, golf ball sales were up 10% in August. They're up 10% on course. So that was good. But what we have seen is certainly, it's interesting you say the hardware hasn't been too bad. If the overall market, the hardware for woods and irons has actually been down about 10% for those two. But what we've seen is a 6 and a 7% increase in wedges and putters. So now obviously they're smaller categories, but they're not great. And I very much agree with you. Shoes, that's well down this year. And you're quite right. The clothing, we're down 16% in outerwear. Trousers, we're down, double digits. Shirts are a bit more down there, 4 or 5%, and tops are down a little bit less. But clothing has had a pretty bad year this year. So those people that are highly tuned into clothing, then they would have struggled. But
so I have a question then. So
yeah.
So let's rewind and say it's this time last year, or I'm buying last year for this year for 2024, and I know that there's going to be Olympics, I know there's going to be Euros, and I say, right, okay, I'm being pessimistic. So is the response to that then, okay, I won't buy as much, or I'll lessen the number of brands, I shrink effectively, with the hope that I can buy stuff at the time to top up if I do better than I'm expecting? Or is the advice actually, you know what, I should work harder on my business and make sure that I'm pushing more marketing, I'm selling harder, and still order, based on driving more sales through improving my turnover, improving my margin, rather than just shrinking?
Well, the first thing's always margin, because margin pays the bills, right? So you've got to try and protect that margin. But saying you're making 70%, but only doing it on $5,000 isn't very helpful. You have got to look at that cash margin. So it is a balance on what is going to sell and what's going to generate profit. And you need to have a mix of products that will deliver you the optimum amount of cash profit. Now that comes in a mix of products in terms of categories, and then it's a mix of products in terms of brands. So you have to have a strategy for both. What's working well in your shop, what's working well in the market overall, and you need to have a balance, because you're going to have customers that are coming in asking for stuff. Now, when you're picking your brands, some people can't afford to have all the brands in the store. And if you're an active salesman, if you 90% of the time, as long as if you fit that product well, especially with hardware, you could take any of the mainline brands kit, right? They've got something that's in the good, better, best range, and depending on the customer, if you fit it properly, you could get any of those brands' products fitted better than if they just went and picked an item off the shelf. So it may be that you need to put you need to commit to a brand, say, right, okay, I really believe in this model set this year, and you have to choose which models. Now, some of the groups that we deal with, some of them are very disciplined in terms of, right, we're not dealing with these brands, so there's a limited set of products. Others have got a wider range of products because they've got a more diverse range of members. But irrelevant of that, you've got to work out what works well for your business. Just because all these other people are doing X doesn't mean X necessarily is going to work for you. So you've got to pick the brands that work for your customers, that people that come in through the door, and then you've got to pick something that you believe is going to work for your work, and you can get behind and sell. Because an active salesperson is going to do a lot better than an inactive one. And I think sometimes last couple of years people have been really flying off the street to buy hardware because we had this whole shift with COVID. And I think one of the reasons we're down in woods and irons this year, which we're down in both those categories, is I think it's basically the pull-through effect. That the typical replacement cycle for woods was about 4 years, irons was about 7 years. And what we've seen in during COVID, people have more disposable income, they're playing more golf, and they said, instead of waiting 7 years, hey, I'm 3 or 4 years in, I fancy a new set of irons, or I've had this wood 2 or 3 years, I'll buy a new wood. What that's done is that's then grabbed those future sales out and dragged them forward. Yeah. And so I really think what we're seeing now is some of the decline is because of the future sales that have happened in the last 2 years, and we still had a very positive period in clubs, a bumper period in clubs, and we're just feeling as the wave crashes on the beach, at some point it has to fall back down again into the sea, right? And we're just in that period going down. There are some interesting changes. I'm interested. If you look at year to date, look at units for balls. Ball sale units are up 4%, which is great.
So people are playing, but they're not spending.
Yeah, and ball sales on course are up ball sales on course are up, the same, pretty much the same. So there hasn't been a shift in where they're buying balls. It's slightly bigger off course than on course, and I think some of that will be to do with the start of the year, where it was a crap start of the year. People probably prepped at the driving range and bought a bit more at the beginning of the year of the driving range. But if you looked on course this month, on course we're up 10% in units. Gloves are up 4% in units on course. So we obviously deal with lots of on course. We also deal lots with off course. We have a very diverse mix with which pull the data in there from. We've got in the UK getting on for 600-700 stores that are feeding in from various places. So we can see from much wider context of what's going on. And units have been good, gloves have been good. So there's been that participation going on, and it'll be interesting to see when the Sport Insight guys produce their rounds played, what those numbers look like. I'd imagine there's been some elevation. It may not be back to record levels, but you would suggest it's been positive based on the products that are going through, certainly in August. But what's not been happening is they've not been spending on the big ticket items, because the only other things that interestingly have had a little increase. Actually, no, I've just kind of was wedges, certainly on course. And then gloves. Actually, interestingly, trolleys have had a little increase. But what I would say about that is trolleys have been absolutely horrendous the last 2 years. And in fact, if you look at trolleys year to date versus 22, trolleys are kind of in units are 11% down. So based on what they were, we've had some declines in there, but there's been a bit of return. So there has been some spend, but I think some of the information that came out today is a really good indicator of part of the problems. Certainly towards this period here, I think there's actually the consumer confidence is low. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people very fearful of what's going to happen in the budget, because I think increasingly people are worried about the impacts on taxation and things, and so I think they've just trimmed back the last month or two on some of the big ticket items, and that's why we've seen a decline in some of those. So some of the retailers that have operated and been doing promotions and a bit of clearance and stuff now will have probably shifted some volume through, because they've it's been priced incentively, but generally I think it's been difficult. And we said right at the beginning of the year we're expecting it to be down. The main reason was because of lagging weather effects and the fact there's been a lot of distractions through the year, and we're pretty much exactly where we kind of said it was going to be. And that's just because you're kind of looking at the stats, and we've kind of been doing this a long time. So I think there's got to be a little bit of reflection. People have got to start being more selective as to the information they listen to and the advice that they get given, because I think increasingly there's quite a lot of generic stuff out there, but there's quite a lot of nonsense out there. We've also got to be slightly more selective in terms of not everyone can be up. We have to understand if there's something that's going to be up, there's something that's going to be down. And that happens not only with brands, as we've spoken, that will have launch cycles that are in their out phase, but it also happens with categories. We very rarely see a category have more than 2 big years, and then it usually tails off. So, we have a hot time for irons and we have a hot time for woods, or a category as such. But what almost always happen is if someone's sucking money into that portion of the market, you'll find that the other stuff, the discretionary spend on trolleys and bags and other bits and pieces, will be down. And so there isn't an infinite amount of money so that everything can see growth. So I think some people take for granted some of the launch phases in their product selection, but I think people need to be a little bit more discerning and saying, right, okay, I think this is going to be hot, and I'm going to get behind that product, and I can see that that's then going to take from some of the other brands that I might have in the store, because they're either in the second year of the launch phase, or they haven't got anything new this year, or just fundamentally their product isn't going to be as good as this, and my customers I think are going to like that. But retailers, unfortunately, I think just need to take a little bit more ownership of that, and as opposed to being kind of led down a path which inevitably is usually by a sales guy who wants them to spend more money with them, which I know a bit brutal, but I'm not making apologies, but because I believe it, and I think that there's guys out there this year that are having a very positive year. Now they've probably changed stuff in their business, or they've done stuff that is generating sales, and they've taken the opportunities that have before them, or maybe they made some picks in terms of product selection, and they've ridden the kind of wave that some of the brands have been on and optimized for that. But a lot of the information is there available for people to get some understanding of and see where the market's moving, and just got to make some decisions. So
Phil, talk to us about the data tech reports. This is where a lot of our retailers get the information from. And it's free to sign up, these monthly data tech reports.
It's a data sharing agreement, right? So it's their Circana reports now. And the very cool thing about Circana is that while data tech's an expert in golf, what we're going to be able to bring to the market with Circana is insights into other markets. So the other thing that's bear in mind is that we're like, let's say I'm just picking a number. Let's say we're 2% down in golf. I think if you looked in some of the other leisure activities that are out there, cycling and tennis and maybe a few things on those lines, I've got a feeling they are much more down than we are in golf. So while we're feeling the pinch in golf a little bit, and some people are faring worse than others, I think the having some understanding, and I'll try and bring some of that in future things when we've got a little bit more access to a bit more data. We can get some context as to what's happening outside of golf, because ultimately we're a leisure activity, right? Yeah. And while golf, a lot of avid golfers will only spend money on golf. There is money. Consumers making their choices as to whether they buy a new tennis racket or a new bike or something else that is their other passion that they're dealing with, and that's something that we can start getting a bit more visibility in.
But go on then. I'm going to ask the question: why does that matter? I'm a little shop. I turn over 200 grand. Why does it matter what the market's doing? To me,
well, it matters what the market's doing because it gives you an indication of the mindset of the consumer and how they're spending or planning on spending. So if the market is down, it gives you an indication across a bigger sample than your shop that things are going to happen. Now, in terms of if the market is down in the middle of the season, you've got a pretty good there's a pretty good chance that people are going to cut prices, and if the market then cuts the prices, it's going to affect you, because if you've got too much stock, that stock is now going to achieve less sales in the store, because if you're not cutting your prices but everyone else is marking their prices down, you're going to lose sales, right? So having some understanding what's going on outside your doors is critical because it impacts what happens inside your doors. So I think again, it's probably a good point. I think a lot of people float on, go, I don't care what's going on in the market, it doesn't affect me. But that's complete nonsense. You're not thinking straight there. There is an impact that goes on in the market. There's an impact in terms of what people see in and their mates are buying who aren't members of a particular club, and then there's an impact, a very tangible impact on the value of your stock and the sales you'll be able to achieve based on the behavior of other people outside. If one of the big boys starts chucking out, a particular brand at a certain price and you don't match it, well, you're likely to have lots of conversations that they're doing that. And then on the flip side, if you don't respond appropriately or aren't a good enough salesman to get them to buy it from you, they'll buy it from somewhere else. That is going to have a direct influence on your thing. So what we do is, with the retailer data reports they get, is on a monthly basis, they get the top 10 selling items, they get what share they've got, so they can see how much they're moving through. You can match that up with the items that you've got in your store. You can see the ASPs that they're going through. And the beauty of this is the ASPs across all the stores we collect the data from. It's the ASPs.
These are average selling prices, right?
Independents, American Golf, Euroselect, Foremost, TGI, some of the Royals, there's lots and lots and lots of shops in there. So it is a proper market price that has gone through the till at. And then you can also see where the total market is, because it'll give you a position, say whether the market's up or down or not. So then you can see whether, if your sales are up or your sales are down, how are you performing relative to the market? Because there'll be lots of guys out there that are going, oh no, I'm really down. It's, I'm down 2% or whatever, and be feeling really bad. But if they know the average off course guy is 4% down, they're actually doing a lot better. So, they can take some positivity from that as opposed to always it being negative. But because the reality is we're just in a situation where consumers aren't feeling confident and they aren't spending money. We've been through a very distracting year. We had a really poor start on the weather, which was just a continuation of last year's really poor weather. So there's a lot of indicators at the beginning that would given us some illustration as to where we might end up. And we've done endless presentations over the last 15 years or so to say that if there is a football championships or Olympics, it has a 1 to 2% reduction usually on the year's totals, because it just, that's what happens.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah.
I don't know why. It's just, that's what the stats show. Mm-hmm. So, anyone that was starting off at zero before they thought about the Olympics or the football championships, you needed to bring it down to 2 or 3% down, because that was what the impact was going to have in the worst possible time. Now, it looks like the football championships and maybe the weather then had a bigger impact than the Olympic Games, which is interesting. Maybe that's just part and parcel with the kind of people that play golf and their external interests. But the football championships always seems to have a negative impact on things.
Yeah. So planning for next year, we can wrap this up quite soon, because obviously we're sort of half an hour in, and no, it's good. I think it's been really useful. Hopefully everyone listening, planning for next year. If I was looking at the data now, looking at where we are with the market, looking at my shop with the excess stock, next year I'm determined to sign up to the Circana reports. I'm going to keep on top of my ex-post reports, and I'm going to keep an eye on what's happening in the market. But in terms of buying now for next year, there is no Olympics next year. There's no Euros. We can't make predictions.
There aren't the distractions next year that we've had this year. So that's a tick, and that's a positive when we're looking at the plan. I think we're going to end up on a more negative note this year. We might end up having the weather being drier, so actually we get through a better Q4. So we have a bit of a longer tail. Indian summer, who knows? Forecast this weekend, as we were discussing earlier, isn't very good, but maybe that's just short term. I don't know. The weather is just a nightmare in terms of it has a significant impact, and yes, it is difficult to predict what impact what's going to happen. I mean, I certainly can't predict the weather, but you can kind of get some trends from that, and they were pretty consistent last year. But I think what we're going to be seeing next year is the opportunity for it to be a slightly better season, because we haven't got the distractions. But I think the thing that we now need to be paying some attention to is what happens to the budget, and how do people react to the impacts that's going to have on their discretionary spend. And we may be going into a slightly different phase where actually, for all the complaining and everything that we've had with over COVID and everything on those lines, we've actually had a pretty good run of people spending an awful lot on discretionary bits and pieces. But if we're going to go into a phase where we've got a lot higher taxes and cuts, who are a lot of people that play golf, pensioners, they've just had if they're having their fuel allowances cut, there's obviously going to be some just a little thing in the psyche that they'll say, oh, I'm going to spend a bit less. Arguably, maybe they don't account for the large spend in the shops anyway, because they don't spend as much as some people do. But there's just a few things that are going to be weighing on people's minds that may have a negative impact on where they actually spend their money. And I'm always looking for positive news and positive things that are going to encourage spend. If the weather is better over the next 3 months. Okay, and because we seem to be going in quite long cycles of weather at the moment, in terms of when it starts being bad, it's not just 1 month. I mean, we had, last year, if you looked at May and June, they were good, and then we went into July, August, September, October, November. They were all double-digit increases in kind of wetness, and then we went into February, March, April. So if I give you the stats from December. From December, we had 34% increase in rain days. Then January flipped it, so that kicks me with it, but that was only 19% down. But then we had 32, 40, and 39% increase. So you seem to be getting these runs. And actually, if I look at my sheet here, there's a couple of months together that seem to be working. So if we get a better finish to the year, maybe that will then give it a better start to the year. And if you have a good start to the year, January, February, good start to March and April, then you can have a better year because it's just people get into the habit. So that doesn't help us now, but it does help when we get there. At least we're in a position like the goalkeeper to try and react to what we think is going to happen. So I would say that we're having to make decisions on what we're buying next year. You need to have some understanding what those products are going to look like and who you believe with, and what is the mix within your store. Look at what's done well this year. Is it likely that you're going to have a second year hot year? Is it likely that is it going to be a third hot year? You have to take some factors into that. You need to commit to enough stock so that you've got stock in the shop and that you can be a stockist. There is this fallacy that some people are running with, I won't order anything and I'll just order it next year. Well, you're not going to have anything to sell, right? And the other thing that we've proven is even if it's a bad year, the numbers are only 4 or 5% down. So if you ordered, that's not me cancelling everything. That's not me cancelling an entire brand necessarily. Although that could be the response, because what you might say is actually, I like this brand more. I'm going to put more effort into that, and I'm going to put 50%. I'm going to spend 50% more of this brand, and then I'm going to pull some out of the other brand. That could be a realistic approach. But the reality is that even if we end up 5-6% down on course this year, it's 5 or 6% down. It's not 30% down. It's not. So the spend, you should be committing to. I kind of always worked on the 80-20 principle. You should be committing to, in order to show the willing to the brands and show the ability to negotiate some discounts. You should have a plan for 80% of your spend. So you should be able to commit to 80% of your spend now. And even if it was another bad year that we were another 5% down, what it means is the replen spend that you were going to do, that 20% which you haven't accounted for, all of a sudden that's going to be 10%. But the 80%, you should be with confidence, be able to commit to that and have a plan as to when that's going to go through, because the chances are that's just how it's going to work. And that's how it's always happened in the past. Certainly some of the smaller stores where they've got a bit more control, some of the bigger stores that maybe put more effort into promotion or changes in the business, they'd need some different commitments. But I think realistically you could commit to those levels. Now some people have saying, oh yeah, you don't want to commit to anything, you just pick it up at the end. Well, that's great, but if you can't get anything, because basically the manufacturers are having the same conversations as well, and so they don't want to be left with loads of stock. So if you don't commit to enough, and it may be you have to commit, maybe what you can say is, I'm going to commit to X amount because I'm pretty confident I'm going to do this, but I'm not quite sure what the mix is going to be. So you might be able to get a bit of flexibility towards the actual arrival time. But the reality is that if we had a situation where all of a sudden all the retailers stopped ordering stock, then the brands would stop ordering stock as well, and then all of a sudden we'd get to a period where there's no product to sell. So it has to be a partnership. It's not all the brand's fault. This is another thing that kind of winds me up a little bit. It's not all the brand's fault if stuff hasn't sold in your store. Sometimes it is the retailer. You haven't done a good enough job at selling, or you've picked too much stuff and you've confused the consumers, or the weather's shit and there's not enough people coming through, and that's not the brand's fault. So there is an element that I think you need to make sure you're working with brands that you have a partnership with. So there's a degree of flexibility. You've got to commit to a bit to them so they can commit to go and buy their stuff and have it in stock for you. And you will probably get more loyalty if you have less brands you're dealing with. So maybe the response is that you trim a brand out if it's one of the brands that you're not completely committed to. So if you wanted to reduce the amount that you were committed to, maybe that's one way you could do it. But at the same time, you need to be confident that the brand you're chopping out isn't going to contribute something to your product mix that would then benefit your overall retail sales.
That's great advice. Mark, have you got anything else? Oh, sorry to Phil.
Add one thing. It's very easy for me to say it here, looking at the data.
Yeah.
All right? I do understand. It's my ivory tower. I can chuck all this stuff out, but but what I say is that there are some fundamentals which every individual pro or golf retailer can follow, but they have to apply them to their particular situations. I don't know the situations of each of the stores. I don't know the customers, so they need to pick these rules and apply it to themselves. If people are coming in and telling them you should do X and Y, I would question that, because do they know your business as well as you do? I certainly don't, but I can tell you what some general guidelines are. But retailers do really need to, I think, start taking control of what's going on in their business. And I have a feeling that there's few of them that have abdicated a little bit, and those are the ones that are going to see some of the business slip away, because then they're not in control of what's going on. So again, I know it's not easy. It's easy for me to say it here. I do understand that, but at the same time, I'm trying to be a little bit a little bit controversial, just to have a degree of what's the term I'm looking for? Yes, something to aim for in terms of the data and stuff, and then just applying that to your business.
Ultimately, all I'd add to that is just, a good starting point is always our little budget tool. Download that. Got to have a budget. If you haven't got one of those, you're dead in the water, because that will help you, guide you, see how well you're doing. XPOS will obviously give you the key stats live as you go through the year, but you need something to target. You need something to aim for. You've got to have history. So set it up now. Get it set first, so you know what you should be doing every single month in order to hit your targets, and that way you can react. I know a lot of people get maybe not depressed, but I don't want to see the fact that I'm down X%. Actually, you need to know that so you can react, and that's the key thing. Is it's live. You react to it as you see that you've had a bad month because of the weather, because of the Euros, whatever it is. You need to know that so that you can sit down with your team and you can go, right, I can see we're down. What are we going to do about it? And you can come up with ways of hopefully easing that pain.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to sort of just remind people of where we get our data from, which is hundreds of on and off course pro shops around the UK, and that we are probably the only source, I think, of sort of independent, this kind of unique data. So it's the real facts that people do need to run their businesses. And I think as a business, hopefully people know that we are here if they need help looking at their XBOS reports and looking at the Circana reports, the data reports. If you want to get started with this, I'd say just get in touch. You can email us at hello@xbos.co.uk, easy to remember, and just reach out, have some advice. We've got guys on the road, we can come and see you, we can have a telephone call. We are, our business is sort of based on trying to help your business grow. So, hopefully people will recognise that and see that this is good, honest, authentic advice, and we are here to sort of genuinely help.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at both organisations, look at Circana and look at XPOS, there's no incentive for you to buy anything, any golf product, other than if we think it's going to help you make more money. We're just interested in the money. There's no, Circana we don't care if the numbers are up or down. All we're trying to do is tell you what the numbers are, so hopefully by participating you then can make more valuable and more accurate business decisions. XPOS is the same. And in terms of a selection of retailers, Circana gets its data from everyone, basically. We get from the smallest little pro shop that's doing 20 grand a year, we get it from Amazon, we get it from Walmart, we get it from Dick's Sporting Goods. We get it from all these massive brands that we have a huge, cross section of data from. Now, in the golf side of things, we're only using in the UK using the specialty ones and all the specialty providers. We don't have that tier of mass merchants yet, but the experience that comes from having the data from some of the biggest retailers in the world is very valid, and the reason they participate is because the information they get back is critical to the healthy running of their business.
Yeah, 100%. Great. And if you want to sign up to the Circana reports, which you get free on a monthly basis, again, just email hello@xboss.co.uk and we'll make sure it gets to the guys at Golf Data Tech. Is that okay, Phil?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, no
awesome.
Problem.
That's great. I hope everyone's found this really useful. It has been like a really kind of like information-packed session. But, we haven't spoken to you guys since the start of the summer. So it's been really useful to have this catch-up.
Cool.
Yeah?
Nice to talk. Sorry,
yeah.
Ranted.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope it's been good. And we will come and talk to you again before the end of the year. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.